This is your Chargers linebacker, Daiyan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Daiyan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Daiyan Wolkenstein. That day that we were bracing for finally came as free agency frenzy officially started today. Deals became official today. Moves were officially made. And at least up until now, it may not have been the barn burner of a day that Chargers fans were expecting to see earlier this afternoon. But of course, we're going to get into all that. What moves obviously were made, what moves were not made, transactions and deals that were officially official this afternoon, and where that leaves the team from here and where do they go in terms of building it out as we get closer to the NFL draft. But of course, before we get into any of that, Daiyan Wolkenstein, sir, how are you?
Relieved, I think. I think relieved would probably be the word that I would use to describe. You know, I think this has been like, it's felt like marching towards D-Day. It felt like it was so heavy on Chargers fans and myself, and just waiting for like, can we please just have this happen, right? Like, get it behind us. And while
give me the bad news so I can get on with my life.
yes. Like, and while not all of it is behind us, enough of it is behind us to where we now know a little bit more about like what this future Chargers team will look like, and the big names. So we'll talk about Khalil Mack restructuring. We'll talk about the Mike Williams release and the impact of that. We'll talk about kind of where things stand with Keenan Allen and with Joey Bosa, and what this wide receiver room will now look like in the post Mike Williams era, as well as free agency and where we go from here. But before we get to that, Jake, we love doing live shows. Live shows, I think, is where we get the most out of these episodes. We have the most interaction with fans and with listeners and viewers. This is with you, for you, by you, viewers. So you know the deal. If you don't, we'll remind you. Leave the comments, topics, ideas, feelings, emotions, put them in the chat.
Frustrations.
We will do our best.
Anger management fence.
We'll do our best to weave those throughout the discussion today. But Jake, before we get to everything, let's pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends over at Bet Online.
Yes, sir. I want to remind everybody that the easiest way to get into all of the sports action, it's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick higher or lower on your favorite or least favorite player stats. You could win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Just pick between 2 and 5 players to fill out your pick'em entry. Get every pick right and take home some cold hard cash. Use the promo code Unleashed and get your first deposit doubled up to $500 by Underdog. Going over to Underdog Fantasy today and let them know that Chargers Unleashed sent you.
All right, so Jake, let's get right into this for a second. I had a little technical difficulties here. Give me 1 sec. There we go. Let's get to some of these comments that we have right off the bat. Let's see. We appreciate you guys. Thank you. Jason says, "What's up, Ball? Good evening, Bolt fam. Sad Mike Williams is gone. So happy we got to keep Mac for now. New era of Chargers football is here." Daniel Gomez says, "How do we feel about void years?" My answer would be pretty darn good. I would like it. I think it helps. Jason says, "Happy that Mac is still here." We have some suggestions about trading Bosa and re-signing Mike Williams. A lot of people excited about Khalil Mack staying with his team. We'll talk about that here in a bit. Paradise Hill says, "Watch Joey Bosa miraculously stay healthy and tear it up somewhere." First question of the episode, Jake. Do you think they will re-sign Mike Williams? Also, I'm thinking if they do, the draft will be O-line, tight end, corner, running back, D-line, and maybe one wide receiver. So, first question. What are the odds that the Chargers team re-signs Mike Williams?
Yeah, there was a report that came out shortly after the Mike Williams release that there was a possibility that he could re-sign with the Chargers for less money.
They broke the news, yeah.
Obviously you'd love for that situation to play out. I just think that his free agent market is going to be so robust that another team will probably be able to sign him to a very cheap contract that he could very well take. Honestly, we have no idea what a cheaper contract would look like with the Chargers if he ended up returning, but his market is going to be robust. Um, and again, I'm not sure on the numbers. I know we're seeing contracts like what Calvin Ridley was getting out there in free agency now going to the Titans for his money. And even in a wide receiver ridden draft the way it is, as much as Dan and I like to talk about the wide receivers that are in this upcoming draft, and it is deep, it'll be interesting to see what the figures are for him, where he ultimately goes. Um, I think just between now and April, personally, I'm not going to hold on to too much faith on that, unfortunately, as much as I would like to see Mike Williams back with this team at a lesser number. Yeah, I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I will say, like, there's a reason why Mike Williams was released. And you look at the numbers, and I know Calvin really honestly got more than I thought that he was going to get. But look at the per year numbers of Calvin Ridley. That's like 10 million less than Mike Williams' current contract before he was released. So, like, Mike Williams isn't going to get what he was signed up for with LA. Now, the question then becomes, like, will the Chargers sign Mike Williams to 20 million a year? I don't know. I don't know if that's healthy. And a part of me thinks it's probably best for them to just like move forward and kind of just with the new era of Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh, the type of offense you want to run, like make this their own vision. So I don't think that there's a good, like a high likelihood, but there's a chance because I tweeted earlier, like he has familiarity with Justin, with Keenan, and with kind of the offensive players they have on this team. And when healthy, he is elite at what he does. And there's probably no one better at what he does well than him. It's unfortunate he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's had kind of injuries throughout his career, but I I don't think that it's a high likelihood. Second part of this question, O-line, tight end, corner, running back, D-line, and a receiver. Basically, you're saying all the positions. Yeah, I mean, real talk, they're probably going to get an offensive lineman in the draft, probably going to get a tight end, definitely going to get a corner, probably going to get a running back. D-line, they have to, I would think. And we'll talk about this in a bit. Their wide receiver group now is not as, I was going to say it's thin, but it's not as thick as people would like it to think it is. So it's a tough day. And I do, Jake, I think we should just talk a second about like, before we get into the rest of the stuff, like shout out to Mike Williams. We've had him on the show here several times. Jake, let me just ask you, or Chargers fans, like when you think of Mike Williams, is there like a play or a time or a game or two that come to mind that were your favorites of his?
Yeah, I think it would be at the top of the list of many Chargers fans. You got to go to the Kansas City game. You have to. Pulling off a win like that in that type of a fashion to Mike and to do it on a 2-point conversion, basically just where it was just like, no, screw it. We're going for the win. We're not giving these guys any more chances. Just to, again, when Rivers was the quarterback and you had this offense the way it was, and this was kind of Mike Williams starting to like really take over that spot. That's what we kind of expected of Mike, was right around that time when he started producing like that. And I remember that game. I remember where I was. I remember who I was watching it with. And to see all of that play out. And ultimately, that was a game that helped lead the Chargers to the not to the Super Bowl, to the playoffs that year. And it was just a wild atmosphere to watch everything like that play out and to have the game winner come at the hands of him. And the fact that they ended up executing that play a number of different times against the Chiefs after that, just like very, very soon afterwards. It was, he has made a career against the Chiefs. He always seems to show out against the Chiefs, which kind of gave him that reputation. But that's probably the one that sticks out in my mind. I know that the catch that he had against the Titans a year ago was a big one along the sidelines that helped the Chargers win that game. And for the game-winning field goal. You could go back to the Raiders game that was at the end of the season where he wasn't 100% healthy, but ended up putting up 111 yards in that game. I mean, he was critical for the Chargers to even be in that game, for as strange as that game ended up playing out, because the Chargers just seemed so snake bitten in a number of different ways, and he was one of the few bright spots of it. So there's a lot of memories that you're going to miss from Mike Williams. You probably wish that it could have been a little bit more productive just in terms of his health. And then, as much of the stuff that we want to talk about with Brandon Staley, Joe Lombardi, strangely enough, that felt like Mike Williams kind of got an expanded role underneath those two, because he wasn't just your deep X receiver, 50-50 catch ball guy. They started using him over the middle, and you started using him in a variety of different ways where he was able to get open and make more plays than just being a straight down the field guy. And I hope for him that wherever he ends up landing, it's going to continue that trend, because he was very productive in that role. And, unfortunately, the scenario that we were put in today was brought on by the old regime. So yes, it's a heartbreaker to walk away from Mike Williams due to contractual obligations, but you wish him the best.
Yeah. That Kansas City game in Kansas City was top tier, like elite. Like that was kind of like take over. I mean, hell, he rushed for like a 20-yard touchdown in that game. And they had 2-point conversion, obviously, had the catch in the end zone. I mean, the guy was just an absolute beast. Someone said in here, I think Jason Evelich says Chief Killer. Like that was, I think everyone knew, and Chiefs fans as well knew about that. A lot of people asking about free agents. We'll get to that in a second, but because of what happened with Mike Williams and the release from that move alone, technically, because of some of the other releases they had to some smaller name players, that move alone put them then under the salary cap restrictions going into the new year. So I think there was kind of a brief like sigh of relief of, okay, well, sucks, pain. Mike Williams is gone. Oh, okay, we made it. And then good news, I think, for a lot of Chargers fans, Khalil Mack, you get news from Adam Schefter, I believe, that Khalil Mack had agreed to restructure, quote unquote, his contract and will be a Charger this coming year, which is massive. Jake, you and I talked about the numbers that Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa and Keenan Allen, even if they kept all three and got rid of Mike Williams, like those three numbers, like you just can't sustain a team with 30 plus million and three players not being a quarterback. Khalil Mack restructuring, for all intents and purposes, means he's going to be extending his contract with the Chargers. And we saw people talk about earlier, maybe it's void years. It gives Chargers more ammunition this free agency to go out and mess around. To my knowledge, I haven't seen it. There haven't been any numbers about what that new contract will look like. But that's huge. Not like, put aside the fact that they keep someone who just has 17 sack season. The fact that they were able to keep him, extend him, and lower the cap number. Massive. Jake, did you see that as a win for the Chargers? Or do you see it as a, well, they should have ripped the Band-Aid, but like this is a nice consolation prize? Like, where do you fall with this? You're on mute.
That would help. I muted it because I started coughing. Apologies. I was going to say, well, that's where you kind of felt like this whole day that we were dreading for. It still kind of feels like we're not done in this scenario. I don't necessarily mean with Khalil Mack, but I think decisions are still going to be possibly made as it relates to Joey Bosa in this circumstance. So for me, I had kind of come around to the idea of, it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. If you keep one or if you keep both of them, they're only going to end up remaining with this team for at least one more year. Better to get what you can for them right now in a trade or whatever it may be. And let's move forward into the future with Tuli and find your next edge rusher of the future to pair him with. So I had spent the last month or so okay with that idea. Now, am I upset that Khalil Mack is back? Absolutely not. I mean, for a guy at his age, putting up the production that he did last year, you could tell how much of a leader he is for this locker room and how much the players love and respect him. And obviously, with a new front office and a new coaching staff, how much they respect him too. So ultimately, I'm glad that they ended up getting this deal done and that he was going to end up staying. I think the optimistic side of you and I, Dan, was that Keenan Allen and Mack would probably be the two out of the big four that were the most realistic to stay based on their play and their benefits to each side of the ball. So
Most deserving to stay, if we're being honest.
yes,
With
but
their play and performance.
as we got closer to this free agent frenzy deadline, there were so many reports that we just heard that it was going to be, 3 out of the 4 are going to be gone. They're not going to be here. And, it's a tough pill to swallow, but you spent all that time talking about it and you're like, okay, I made my peace with it. I'm good with it. I'm ready to move on. And then, surprise, 11th hour decision and Khalil Mack restructures.
What do you think happens to Bosa? Asks F Prince. I don't know if that's a tribute to Fresh Prince. I'm not sure. But Jake, let's kind of get to that for a second. Nothing has been talked about, or at least officially, when it comes to Joey Bosa. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. What do you think happens to Joey Bosa? Do they stay in LA?
Here's where the Chargers don't necessarily have pressure or lack of leverage anymore, because everything, of course, leading up to free agent frenzy with these 4 big contracts, the entire league knew that the Chargers were squeezed when it came to the salary cap situation. They knew that they were going to have to dump some people. And obviously, unfortunately, Mike Williams ends up being the casualty to that. As of right now, with the restructure, and then, of course, getting all of the Gus Edwards, Will Dissly, and Lohi Gilman contracts under the books, they're roughly now, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, I think it's just under $6 million they have in open cap space. So they're compliant right now, which gives the Chargers a little bit of leverage back, because if their plan is to still possibly move on from Joey Bosa and field some calls, they have a little bit of that leverage back where they don't necessarily have to give him away now. There is no timeline that they have to measure now. So I think they got a little bit of that back. I wouldn't be shocked if they ultimately ended up trading him. I did think today, though, Dan, because of the fact that he is still part of this roster, one of the first comments that Jesse Minter said in his interview when he arrived with the Chargers is said, I would love to have those 3 and coach him on my team. And he was referencing to Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Tuli. So who knows what's going to happen? I think it's a big question mark with Bosa. As of right now, I don't think you could necessarily sway one way or the other. I will say, I think the closer that we get to the draft and Joey Bosa still remains on his roster, I think the higher chances are that the Chargers don't move off of him for this year. At least you wouldn't take those conversations and pick them up maybe until the summertime. Who knows? But the closer that we get to the draft, I think it maybe be the less likely that the Chargers move off of him and they would just play out this season.
Yeah. Dave Elliott asks, how much money can we actually free up with more restructuring? Quite a bit. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say, I think Keenan Allen, you can restructure like 15 million more to the books for this year. I believe Joey Bosa is in that same realm. Now, takes 2 to tango. They have to be willing to do it. There have been reports, I think I've seen that like Joey Bosa is unwilling to do that or unwilling to take a pay cut. I'm not quite sure exactly where that is. Khalil Mack did. And, I don't know if it's fair to compare, but if you ask me which of those Chargers defensive or which of those Chargers edge players deserves that contract that Mack has agreed to restructure, it's Khalil Mack. Like, there in no world should Khalil Mack be getting paid less than Joey Bosa. And so for that reason, I just do not see them retaining Joey Bosa on that current contract. It doesn't make sense, especially because of the lack of production he's had Some due to injury, some due to whatever. But the facts are, go look at how much money he's making and look how much production he has not given this team. So I do think that when it's all said and done, I think Bosa's gone. I don't know when. I don't know how. I do think that they probably have more leverage now, to your point. Now that they are under the cap, they don't have to worry about like a deadline. Although there are reports, Albert Breer came out with this, which I think this is some nuance to keep in mind. So this is the news that he put. So Khalil Mack's in. I'm reading this quote. Khalil Mack's in. Mike Williams is out, and the Chargers are under the cap. So 4 p.m. is no longer a hard deadline, but 2 more deadlines are looming. Joey Bosa is due $7 million roster bonus on Friday. Keenan Allen is due a $5 million roster bonus on Sunday. So Joey Bosa is going to get $7 million more Friday. Keenan Allen, $5 million more on Sunday. So those are probably the next dates to kind of look at for if they pay those. Though I think the more you get towards the draft, like I honestly don't know. I don't know if they gain more or lose more leverage. I think Keenan gets restructured. Joey Bosa, it seems like, is not willing to. And if I'm the Chargers, that's kind of my answer. Do you think that it would be stupid to just cut him?
I've come around on the idea. Like I said, I was okay with ripping the Band-Aid off and moving on from that. Now, if you were to tell me that you'd go out and you'd get a Latu in this draft, and you have Latu, Tuli, and Mack as your 3 edge rushers, I'm fine with that. I am 100% okay with that. Joey's just one where you kind of just have to... 8th. Yeah, I mean, you have to think about it long term, and you have to remember that this is a new regime. And where is that money going to get you a year from now? What's the value going to be if he possibly gets hurt again? And I hate to say that, but we've now had 2 consecutive years where Joey has been able to stay healthy for a full season. So you do kind of have to weigh a little bit more of the options. Where it's Mack, is an older player, but he has shown over the past 2 years that he's been able to stay healthy. And maybe, as someone had mentioned in the commentary, maybe that changes with Ben Herbert coming in. It's changing the dynamic as the strength and conditioning coach for this team. Maybe that changes. Who knows? But I still think from the Chargers standpoint, what they needed to get, if they ultimately end up trading Joey Bosa, was some leverage back. And in this circumstance, they did. So to your point, maybe that is the next deadline that the Chargers are looking at specifically, not necessarily to other teams, but that roster bonus. Does that mean another restructure for him? Does that mean that they're going to try to find a trade partner for him before Friday and not have to be obligated to paying that? Does that mean that they ultimately end up cutting him? Who knows? I still think that this front office has decisions to make in that circumstance, but at least they were able to get cap compliant today and take a little bit of the pressure off.
Salvatore Lucas says, cut him. He's not a team leader. He's injury prone and only shows up against weak teams, never shows up against the Chiefs or the Raiders. Paradise Hill says the price goes up on Joey Bosa after the bonus and after the draft. After the draft, maybe. But that's a long time to I'm not sure how the Chargers choose how they draft if they keep him on there. That's a lot of variables. Just wait till after the draft. Thomas Costello, think both will be gone too. Also looking for better from QJ and Darius Davis in the offense. Speaking of Darius Davis, Jake, this Chargers wide receiver room looks a little different now without Mike Williams. And I think it's time to kind of have a hard look at kind of what this Chargers room is going to look like and what they possibly need and don't have anymore. Currently, your Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver room, Keenan Allen, Josh Palmer, both of which I love. I actually really like Josh Palmer, and I kind of hope that they maybe extend him, honestly, because I think he's the best games ahead of him. Quentin Johnston, we've talked about subpar rookie year. Maybe this new staff can kind of help bring him in. He's talked about how he's fueled and he's motivated and he's doing all the work and stuff. Good for him. But so far, left a lot to be desired in his rookie campaign. And then Darius Davis. That's your rookie room. What do you not have, Jake, in this rookie room, or excuse me, in this wide receiver room without Mike Williams?
This will be music to your ears, Dan. How about speed, explosiveness, things that we believed that the Chargers were going to be trying to get in last year's wide receiver class. Unfortunately, that didn't end up panning out. The scary part about this image that's up on the screen, Dan, is it kind of, you know what it kind of reminds me of right now, just looking at it? It reminds me of the original Back to the Future. Because essentially Josh Palmer and Keenan Allen, you could just slowly start to just fade those pictures away. Because remember, both of them, Joshua Palmer's contract is up after this upcoming season. Keenan Allen probably only stays with the team one more season. So just think about this. Your wide receiver room will only possibly look like this for one more year. And the guys that you will have remaining on your contract are the two guys in the middle, and Darius Davis and Quentin Johnston. That should signify the need for a wide receiver in this draft, if nothing else, for the Chargers to prioritize. Now, do they prioritize this at 5? Do they prioritize it with the trade down? Do they prioritize it in the second round? Who knows? There's a whole bunch of different directions they could go, but there is no way, zero, that you could tell me that they cannot go and land a wide receiver within the first 2 rounds.
ZX Zealot says, I think they're going to bring back Mike and run it back on a cheaper deal. Jake, what would be the cheaper deal that you'd be okay bringing Mike Williams back on? Realistically. I'm not saying like a vet minimum. He's not doing it.
I mean, it's funny because when Mike Williams signed his new deal previously,
like 3 years,
that was
$60 million basically.
And that was a bargain considering what other wide receivers were getting at that time. So he's 30 now. I don't know what type of a deal that you'd possibly look at. Maybe a 2-year deal at most, at a much lower cap hit if he's willing to take it, depending on what his market is going to look like. Because I'm assuming that maybe some teams will probably give him, given the injury history, maybe a 2-year deal. Just depends on what the numbers are and what you want to throw at him. Other teams will probably give him like a 1-year prove it deal. But regardless, he's going to have a market. So I'm not so sure, given the Chargers' current salary cap situation, how you'd possibly be able to do that.
I'm not sure. Like, what would the number be? Honestly, like 10, 15. Like, are you doing like you're not doing
maybe
20,
maybe
probably,
you're
right?
maybe you're doing a 1-year deal at 10 or 15 possibly. And to me, in order to make this work for all the rest of the needs that you still have on this roster to build out from, to me, if Mike Williams were to return, I don't think that Joey Bosa would be part of this as well. I still do not see how you can keep all 4 of them in that circumstance. I don't. Even at a lower cap number. I feel like, especially since you had mentioned, he wasn't, from the reports we've heard, maybe he wasn't willing to restructure. So do you trade? Do you cut? We haven't seen what the final numbers of max restructures are yet to figure that out in terms of how much cap space that's going to open up. But yeah, to me, it would still be difficult to keep all 4 of them.
Yeah, and a part of me just... Neighbors at 5, Joseph DiMartini wants me to scream. I have a hard time believing that this coaching staff and front office is going to want to run it back after a release when they are trying to build this team into what they want. If he was what they wanted, they would have found a way to have him stay in a restructured contract, extension, whatever. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. Now, Neighbors at 5 or trade down, best option in my eyes, says Joseph DiMartini. Like, here's kind of this is the struggle that I think pre NFL draft, basically end of season, till the NFL draft. A lot of people, you hear about people talking about like this circular, internal discussion where, for me, for example, Jake, like as soon as I saw Malik Neighbors and started watching more and more of him, I'm like, that's him. That's who I want. Like, please. This was back when the Chargers were like, in 11th or so in the draft. Not happening. Then they get to like 7 or 8, and you're like, yes. And then they get to 5. You're like, oh, dude, let's cook. We had Brett Coleman on. And if you have not listened or watched that episode, I highly recommend that you tune in and listen to kind of his rationale behind why you do or do not take certain players or positions given what this Chargers team needs and given the new staff. The one point about taking a tackle, and I know I'm already dodging all the, the shots fired. And Brett Coleman alluded to this. The floor or the shelf for those elite tackles, there's a bunch of good ones, but that shelf drops off fast. And the drop off from tackles in round 1 to tackles on day 2 versus the drop off of those receivers on day 1 versus day 2, the tackle drop off is far worse. Far worse. And so if you're going to go receiver, there's a bunch of really good options for receivers in this draft in day 2. Handful, I'd probably say, in day 3. Not for tackles. Not for tackles. And so if you're thinking long-term roster building and construction and salary cap and all that jazz, while I wouldn't be over the moon if they went to Fuaga or Alt or whoever at 5 from a tackle position, it would make sense. If it was me, I'm probably... I have a hard time believing that those guys are BPA over Neighbors or Harrison or Rome, honestly. But I would understand it long term. I would understand it.
Dan, I wanted to touch on this for a second because you started bringing up Brett Coleman. So we'll take you guys behind the curtain for a second here, because when we got done doing the episode with Brett yesterday, he kind of gave us his predictions as far as what was going to happen in the top 5. So he said, because I brought up to him, like, well, what about that alternate universe where maybe 4 quarterbacks are taken in the top 4 and Arizona moves off and someone wants to trade up for JJ McCarthy, and we see something that hasn't happened yet in the NFL draft and 4 quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, 4. And he says, I'm actually hearing that Arizona wants to go Joe Alt. At which Dan and I just kind of sat back in our chairs like, what? Excuse me? And then, of course, today was the absolute biggest tease that lasted about 24 minutes, because when Arizona released DJ Humphries, I think all of the Chargers fandom caught onto that like, oh my God, it's happening. There's going to be MHJ at 5 for the Chargers. And then, no, 25 minutes later, Arizona Cardinals signed Jonah Williams to a deal and just flushed that dream down the toilet, unfortunately.
Yeah, but again, I think that was a 2-year deal. So, like, they still could go Joe Alt. Like, they still could. Like, I have a hard time believing they will, honestly. But, like, they could. But I think people need to start warming up or bracing for a tackle in round 1. I think, like, given what we've heard from so
Not
many
at
people,
5,
like,
though.
Okay, so, well, I would say they should probably warm up to that too, because it still could happen. But, like, the worst kept secret is the Chargers want out of number 5. And so a few people said on Twitter, like, if they go in the trade down route, I am fully on board. Like, I am full throttle in going offensive tackle in round 1. But also, there are so many options if they trade down to where, like, you can go CB1. You can go edge 1. You can go JPJ, depending how far down you go. I might still lean tackle because you're still getting an elite one there. But then you may end up with another second-round pick. And then he can go get that wide receiver. You can go get that corner. You can go get that edge player.
See, this is the beauty about having guests on this show, especially during draft season, because the perceptions are so different. Last week, we had Jordan Reed on the show, who made the biggest advocate push for Brock Bowers, not necessarily at 5 because he had the Chargers trading back to 9, selecting Brock Bowers there. But he totally gave a great reasoning as to why the Chargers could use Brock Bowers in this offense. And he didn't believe the whole notion of the tackle for the Chargers at 5. And of course, brought up all of the differences like, well, for every guy that transitions, it's not always the smoothest transition. Look at Evan Neal when he went from the left side to the right side, and he brought up all of those points. And then you get to Brett, who just has a completely different idea as far as what the value of it is. And I wouldn't even say that necessarily either of them are wrong, but this is the great reason why it's awesome to talk NFL draft. And DJ's very much on the offensive line, whether it's at 5 or the way for the Chargers in general.
His kind of dream scenario would be the Chargers trade down, they get Fuaga, they put Fuaga at guard, Pipkins at right tackle, move Fuaga back to tackle after the year. All three of these guys are brilliant minds in NFL draft and roster construction. All three of them have different ideal situations or scenarios, but all three of them value the offensive tackle. And from what we are hearing, from what I have heard and what Jake has heard, inside the Chargers fan base is so much more the neighbors or Roma Dunze or hell, just receiver at 5 than anybody in NFL circles or in the NFL thinks. Other franchises do not think that the Chargers can go receiver because they have a ton of other holes they got to fill. Take it for what it's worth, but that's what we've heard. Billy Silverman, Jake, $5 donation. Thank you so much, Billy. Up to the top you go. Do the moves they've made make a trade down more or less likely? Or does it change it at all?
I don't think it's changed at all. The expectation, you'd hope, is that you've got your trade partner in your sights there at number 11 with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, depending on what the Giants do, so this is where it's going to get interesting because you needed some type of competition. And as Brett said yesterday, there's not much competition behind the Vikings because that's your interdivisional rivals in the Broncos and the Raiders. So you're not going to, one's not going to want to send picks to the other for a benefit of a higher round pick and possibly giving him a quarterback. So do the Giants, do they want that quarterback if he happens to fall to them? If it happens to get past to the Chargers at 6, do they want it? Is Minnesota going to jump them? Giants, unfortunately, don't have that much bidding power because they just gave a second round pick in a trade for Brian Burns. So they're already below draft capital. But I would think that there is a possibility that makes it more enticing for Minnesota to trade up now. And so, yeah, I don't think that it's changed. I still think the goal of the Chargers is to ultimately trade down, accumulate more picks because of the holes that still today remain on this roster. You still, even though you found the problem or the issue to your blocking tight end, you solved that issue for now. You still don't necessarily have a tight end one. Donald Parham, as much as I love him, hasn't proven that he could be that guy yet. You're still going to draft a running back in this class, even though you have Gus Edwards penciled in as RB1 now. You still need to fill out that stable because you don't know what you have with Isaiah Spiller because he wasn't played in the old regime. You don't know what you have in Elijah Dotson. So, yes, if it's me, I think the trade down scenario hasn't changed. I still think it's priority 1. And the best thing would be that you get the Danny special that Dan loves to talk about and you trade down twice. Hell.
Talk dirty. Talk dirty to me. Talk dirty to me. Oh my gosh. If they trade back twice in this draft, man, I am going to be on cloud 9, sipping something dark and with my feet up, Jake, at your house. And I might have to get a cigar. I might have a cigar for that damn day. Mighty, we got a bunch of people asking about
spoiler alert, Dan. Spoiler alert! You're giving away the answers already to the test.
My bad.
There will be a plenty.
Okay. We got a bunch of people asking questions about this. Mighty asks, where do y'all put corner on our team needs list? 1 through 5. Jay, where would you rank the cornerback position as far as a priority for this team?
I would retort it back with, when was the last time that you looked at the Chargers depth chart in the defensive secondary? Because there's a lot of empty space back there. You need a CB to go across from Asante Samuel Jr. You may even go to, who knows? Jasir Taylor, is he your answer at the slot corner? I don't think that he proved that last year. Dean Leonard, as a 7th-round pick, I don't think he's elevated his play enough to where you could trust him with starting time. So Dan and I have talked about this. Hell, even if it's in a trade scenario, Terrion Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell, Nate Wiggins, who I'm a huge fan of out of Clemson. I don't see how you don't come out of day 2 without selecting a corner. I just don't see that happening. It is such a huge need for the Chargers.
And see, and this is the part that I think people just forget sometimes. It's like we're all so enamored by like the wide receiver and the shiny toys. But damn it, dude, like this team can't stop a nosebleed on defense. Like they have no corners on the outside. Like literally, they don't have an outside corner right now unless you're banking on Dean Leonard being your savior. They don't have money. They're not going to go get a top tier one in free agency, so they're getting one early in the draft. I can almost guarantee it. I'm more bullish on them getting a corner early in the draft than a wide receiver by a long shot. Because, fun fact, Jesse Minter's defense is a priority for this team. Jim Harbaugh's team wins on defense. Jesse Minter was brought in to have a freak show defense. And again, Brett Coleman talked about this yesterday. The types of players and the type of scheme and the type of tenacity that this defense is going to look like under Jesse Minter, it is not on the team right now. The secondary corners specifically, I might argue, is the biggest need for this team in terms of like what will translate to victories next year. Maybe center, and probably it's probably between center and corner. Those would probably be my two. Smooth transition, Jake. Devin Herrick, $1.99 donation. Thank you. JPJ at center. There doesn't seem to be many options. Brett Coleman again was describing the unicorn that needs to be on this Chargers team in order to do what Greg Roman does with the offensive line, and was describing JPJ. If it's not JPJ, I mean, that is, I think, I don't want to talk for you, Jake, but that's our ideal guy. But if it's not JPJ, or other centers, and Brett Coleman said there's a bunch of them, but who would be your others that are favorites?
JPJ, to me, fits the mold perfectly, obviously, for what Jim Harbaugh wants to do. If we're talking about everything prioritizing and running the ball and getting back to a physical offensive line, the next guy that comes to your mind immediately should be Will Frazier, because he fits that bill too. Because of his high school wrestling background, Dan, I will keep repeating myself on this. If Frazier had not gotten hurt, I believe that he and JPJ would be contending to be the first center off the board. I think both guys are absolute maulers in the run game. They are great for the system that Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to design and what they want to implement going forward. And like we mentioned on the last live show, Dan, can you just imagine, whether it's JPJ or whether it's Frazier, the fact that they would be learning under the tutelage of Nick Hardwick?
Yes. God, that sounds like, yes. Jeez.
That is, it's a beautiful thought. And I am very bullish on the center class. I think the center class deserves a little bit more, glimmer than I think that it has been put out there, because I still believe that there are centers that you could get in, round 3 and 4. Maybe not as productive and maybe not exactly what you need for Harbaugh's offense in this circumstance that would fit as perfectly as JPJ or Frazier. But I still like this center class a lot. I think it's very underrated.
I agree. Forgotten Lolcow says, I've been advocating for trading down since we locked in the 5th overall pick. Look, dude, you're way behind Jake. Jake's been advocating for trade down since the 1900s.
That's what it feels like. And then, of course, the football gods choose to put us in this situation where could it be Marvin Harrison Jr.? Could it be Malik Neighbors? And that's the time that you're going to tell me that the Chargers are going to trade out of that pick? The football gods are a fickle bitch. They are. God.
Capil comes in here with a good point. You don't need a Ferrari to win the Super Bowl. You just need a bull. Now, I would argue you have a Ferrari already with Justin Herbert. Like, that's never, like, I get so heated when I hear about, not necessarily what Capil's saying, but like the idea that like they have to go out and sign all of these like blue chip free agents, or they have to have all of these insane weapons everywhere. Like, that's not how football championships are won. Like, they're won with depth, and they're won with collectiveness and togetherness and a shared vision and toughness and physicality and imposing wills. And it's not window dressing. It's not finesse. Go watch what happened to Miami this last year. Like, there were Ferraris all up and down that roster, running by everybody. Put them in a grudge match with the Bull in -6 degree weather, -6 degree weather. They get the brakes beat out of them, and they don't have a chance. Like, at some point, you have to punch somebody in the mouth in the NFL. Ferraris don't do that. So, while it would be sexy with a Malik Neighbors on this team or Roma Dunze on this team, I don't think that those two players put this offense over the top. Like, that's not, oh, now they're going to win a Super Bowl because they got one of those star receivers. Like, no, it would be great. It would be awesome to have Justin Herbert get his guy for sure. But we just saw in Michigan, like, they don't care how you win. They just win. Like, JJ McCarthy didn't have crazy stats. Blake Corum didn't have crazy stats this year. And they've all talked about, like, they didn't care. It was about winning. That same philosophy will happen here, in my opinion. A couple corners. People are all in the chat about corners they love. Mike Sanders still. A bunch of people talk about him. Max Melton. Cooper DeJean.
I'm waiting for him to test. I'm so bummed that he could not test at the combine. I understand the injury. Everything's looking good for him to test at his pro day, but you just talk about one of the more athletic DBs that could basically just do it all. Like, take your pick on where you want to play him. I'll just be so interested to see those final numbers when he ends up running.
Who, Jake? Let's maybe give me like 3 names: day 1, day 2, day 3 for corners.
For corner.
If they trade back, let's say they trade back in like the probably not 8 anymore. Let's just say between 10 and 15. Who are the corners that you'd be like, yeah, day 2, then day 3?
Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell are right in that vicinity. I've loved Quinyon Mitchell since December, and all he has continued to do is just break my heart from the standpoint of me knowing that he's not going to be there in the second round. Obviously, he has just done everything right since the testing process began, and his draft stock is just absolutely rocketed. I still believe he has the best instincts out of any corner in this class, but Terrion Arnold is just, he's just a dog, man. He's got everything that Jesse Minter would want for a corner to be in his system. It's just, it would be a perfect fit. So those two, you'd obviously have to go in that scenario. If we're looking in round 2, I mean, God, is it possible, Dan, that Max Melton has elevated his draft stock enough to where he could end up going in the second round? I mean, who knows? You go through some other ones in the later rounds. I really like Cam Hart and Kyrie Jackson, 2 big-bodied corners, both 6'3". I like the way that they played the game at Notre Dame and Oregon, respectively. Ennis Rakestraw, I also like the way that he plays the game. His testing numbers were not the best. Still was more on the underside and running a 5 or a 4.54, but didn't have the type of testing numbers that we expected. And for him, he's still playing catch up because, he didn't end up making the Senior Bowl. and we really needed to see a lot from him coming into this part of the draft scenario, or this part of the draft sequence, given from where we are now to get to April. But the Chargers can go so many different directions.
They can. A couple corners that I really liked, and I talked about this prior to the combine, and then something just balled out. Renardo Green, a lot of people are starting to get on his train. That guy is a press man machine. Elijah Jones, you heard it here first, maybe not first, but that kid is good. Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky, I really, really, really like him. A little raw, but could be a guy to go after. Nehemiah Pritchett, Chris Abrams-Drain, like all these guys are so good. Like the cornerback class is deep this year, and
it's a good problem.
They gotta go. They gotta go that route. They gotta go that route. So, what pick? Asked Frank Blakely. And again, if you just joined us, we've talked Keenan Allen, possible restructure, what that could look like. We talked about Mike Williams being released. We talked about Khalil Mack's restructure agreement that we've heard. Joey Bosa, TBD. We're taking questions, comments. If you have questions, topics like us to discuss, put them in the chat. We'll do our best. I think we've kind of hit the Q&A portion here. Frank asks, what pick would we need to trade down to in order to pick corner in the first round, assuming Arnold? I put like the 10 to 15 range. Jake, do you agree?
I say if this is a trade with the Minnesota Vikings and you're at pick 11, this is 100% the territory to take him. The top 10 is going to be offensive heavy. And even with the moves made today, you have Kirk Cousins now the quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons. That could change their whole draft scenario. Whenever the Chicago Bears choose to move off of Justin Fields, that may change somebody else's. But who knows? But it's still going to be predominantly offensive players in the top 10 of this draft. So right when you get around to pick 11, and between picks 11 and 20, that dynamic is going to shift in terms of the priorities that people are going to be targeting. So I would say 11 is 100% there for Terrion Arnold. And I remember, this is a guy who DJ puts as his 5th overall player on his big board. I mean, he loves Terrion Arnold. Loves him.
Yeah. Is he your CB1 right now?
Yep.
There's a bunch of like the Kamari Lassiter. I think he's getting slept on, man. Like, no one's talking about him. Kool-Aid McKinstry, it's like a whisper at this point. Like there's so many guys who have just been like studs that it feels like people are just getting bored of some of these talents. And there's going to be a lot of guys going out earlier than people think, because I think a lot of people are just like forgetting. Salvatore asks, so is Malik Neighbors a trade down? No, honestly. I don't think it's going to be that. There was a question earlier, Jake. I can't find it, but close your eyes, Chargers fans, viewers. Picks 1, 2, 3, 4. Go quarterback, or go anyone but Marvin Harrison. You're on the clock at 5. You're offered a pretty damn good haul to trade back. You are Joe Ortiz. What do you do?
I'm going to refer to what Brett Coleman said to us off the air last night, Dan, because he said it best. For everything, if anybody watched that, in terms of anybody who disagreed with Brett's strategy and whatnot, Dan again and I brought this up. If Marvin Harrison Jr. was still there on the board at 5, would you trade down? And he said in so many words, F that whole plan that I just said. I'm tearing that up and we're going Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, it is extremely tempting to pass up. I mean, you probably have to be, I mean, number one, you'd probably be fielding calls off the hook. Maybe not now that I say that, because, and I say that just because Minnesota may be the only one that's calling up for JJ McCarthy. So for a player in Marvin Harrison Jr., if the Chargers weren't completely sold on it, I feel like you'd be fielding a lot of calls in that circumstance. But it's tempting. It's very tempting to say, yeah, I'm going to stay put and I'm going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 5 if he's still on the board. But
yes,
this is where the football gods just tear me apart, because I fully understand what you need to do, and I can't say no to trading back at the same time.
Yeah, I think it would cause kind of World War III here for a bit in the chat and with Chargers fans, because that would be rough. Literally, I think in the comments, we're like split 50-50 of the people who want to trade down versus stick and pick. And I get both sides, honestly. I get it. I get it. I apologize, Jake. We had a super chat that was not answered. Mighty asks, thank you, Mighty, by the way. Now that we have lost our linebackers, do we draft one or go free agent? By the way, did you see Eric Kendricks said, hey, I'm going to San Francisco? Just kidding. I'm going to Dallas.
Yeah, he pulled Josh McDaniels' playbook out of his back pocket and said, hey, I'm going there.
Not today.
Not today. I think that this is a market where it's very interesting for the free agent pool of linebackers that's out there right now. I know a lot of people were trying to connect the dots to Titus Bowser, who was released today by the Baltimore Ravens. Good production from him when he's healthy. Could he be signed on a cheap deal? 100%. You're going to have to fill that linebacker room out with somebody, because you don't quite know what you have with Daiyan Henley at this point, because he was limited to mainly special team snaps throughout the year. Nick Neiman has proven that he's not much more than a core special teams player. Technically, you lost three linebackers today, Dan. Kenneth Murray, Kendricks, and Amon. So you're really thin at the linebacker position. So you're going to need to draft one, and maybe the priority, given the fact that this linebacker class also is not the strongest, you're probably going to have to make it a higher priority than you originally thought.
Yeah. The linebacker from Buffalo intrigues me, Tyrell Dodson. He did pretty darn good this past year, filled in for Matt Milano. That could be a linebacker I'm going after, but otherwise you're kind of looking at guys like, you mentioned it, like Bobby Wagner's out there. You're looking at Kyle Van Noy, but I just don't think that's the direction the Chargers will go. I think they're looking for like freak athletes. Like that's like the staple of Minter's, Baltimore's, McDonald's, like that kind of defense. That's what's predicated on. Look at Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. Those guys that were aforementioned are not them. Honestly, they're just not. In the draft, though, like there are some physical freaks. Peyton Wilson, Edgerrin Cooper, Cedric Gray. There's a bunch of guys. If it was me, if people were asking me, I'm probably guessing that they go in the draft. And don't look now, but just like other 17 positions, Jake, I think they're going to go linebacker earlier than people expect. Because again,
just don't trade back up into round one for one. We don't need a repeat of history.
No. But again, your current linebackers, the only linebackers on this team, are Nick Neiman and Daiyan Henley.
It's bad.
And Daiyan Henley might be good. Like he might turn into a great linebacker. Like we have no clue. When we saw him on the field, he looked great. So he could turn into a Patrick Queen type. But they got one that is going to be a physical freak. Nick Neiman, core special teams guy, played well in spurts, or serviceable, I would say. But I don't necessarily think that he's your stud linebacker that the Chargers are probably looking for. So people in the comments are talking about some of the stud linebackers in Michigan that they can go after.
Colson.
Go get that linebacker. I like the other one too.
Michael Barrett.
Barrett. Yeah. I like Barrett a lot, man. Later round guy that you can get. I'd be good. I'd be good with that. Well, Jake, how do you see this playing out now? All this money has been kind of like flown around. They got the Mike Williams release. Max agreed to restructure, which we don't know how much that's going to impact them, but currently they have, I don't know, pennies a bit to play around with. I just don't see them keeping Joey Bosa in the current contract. And if they are able to, however they do it, trade, cut, whatever, that 20-something million will go a long way to filling out this roster and the needs prior to the draft, which I think if I was GM, like that's the way I do it. Like I don't want to be dependent on, my savviness in the draft to trade down 14 times to get enough picks to fill out the roster and UDFAs.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a scary business. Like it would hurt. It'd be a gut punch to no longer have Joey Bosa on the team, but like think about the positives that it could bring. How do you see this playing out in free agency?
It's tough right now because you look at this, and for even the moves that the Chargers made, probably the one that benefited you the most in terms of having an idea of saying, okay, that position is shored up, was the Alohi Gilman signing. Bringing him back was an absolute no-brainer, given the fact that this safety class is very top-heavy. It's not deep. With all the other priorities that you have on this roster, safety was kind of one that was thrown to the back burner. I mean, just add it to the list if that was the case. If you weren't able to bring Alohi back, you'd be in some trouble right now in terms of what moves you'd be able to do. Now, still, even bringing in Gus Edwards and Will Dissly, that solves a little bit of a problem, but you know that the Chargers are going to have a priority to fill out the rest of that stable in the draft. You're still going to take a running back at some part of the draft, so you're going to technically sign one, draft one. Wouldn't surprise me if you do the same for center. Bradley Bozeman is out there, who also has some familiarity with the Ravens right now. Brian Allen is another possibility. Depending on what the contract numbers could look like, could they sign one of these players as a stopgap situation and then go out and draft another one in the in April? You're going to need to back it up. So you already know that the Chargers are going to be double dipping at certain positions, and I haven't even started talking about the wide receiver, the offensive line, the linebacker, the interior defensive line, which currently has no starters there. Austin Johnston and Sebastian Joseph Day are not here anymore. And when we talked about bad looking depth charts, it's very bad in the middle of the interior of the Chargers offensive line right now. They need some bodies there as well. Corner. I mean, do you expect right now, even with the draft capital they have,
by the way,
even with the draft capital they have, they can't fill all these needs just with the draft alone. They would have to trade back an immense number of times. And maybe that would be poetic, that it would just be a makeup for the 10 years that are essentially owed to us from Tom Telesco never executing a trade down to say, we're going to give you 6 trade downs in one draft to make up for those 10 years. Maybe that is the good juju that is headed our way. Who knows? But right now, you can't expect that all of those holes are going to be filled by the draft. There's just too many. So something is going to have to be done to either sign stopgap players at a very low number, or to your point, Dan, you have to free up cap space elsewhere.
And honestly, like the problem that I constantly go back to is like, even if they do trade back a bunch, right? Let's say they get 10 draft picks. That's requiring you to hit on the 10 draft picks. The greatest GMs in the NFL do not go batting 1,000. Like the Chargers have a pick problem. Like they don't have enough. And if they do, they're not batting 1,000. I promise you that. Now, will the coaching staff bring out the best? Will Ben Herbert go out and go beast mode on them and get them ready for sure? But like, that's why I can't see them keeping Bosa, man. I just don't. Like, they don't have the luxury of paying for somebody who has not produced. They just don't. And as much as people, like the idea of him staying, and what if he's healthy? Like, you can't base your franchise on like future options or possibilities when like everything you've just seen the last 3 years tells you it's not going to happen. It's just tough, man. And the Mike Williams thing, it's kind of similar. Like, when healthy, insert the greatness, but like the when healthy part's the problem. And I don't know. So of the positions that are like the biggest need right now, Jake, I guess this is probably the last part here before we head out of here. And again, you guys have been amazing in the chat, keeping this thing going. What positions, we talked to Brett yesterday, Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday.
Yesterday.
And we asked about like the biggest bang for your buck, whether it's free agency or the draft, like getting a good one. What 3 positions where if you were to like target those and fix those with great players would provide the biggest bang for your buck in terms of winning more football games next year? Not window dressing, not roster holes, like what will impact them actually winning more? And his answer was boundary corner, a right tackle, and center.
Yeah.
Those are the 3. Which of those could they now actually fulfill, if any, in free agency?
I think the closest possible one would probably be center. Maybe you get one of these guys as a stopgap option on a low number. I would say that that's a possibility, but you'd still have to go out and get your center of the future. You have to get, this is where I feel that Harbaugh if he's prioritizing Justin Herbert, especially along the offensive line, why not give him a center that he's going to have for the next 5 to 8 years? So regardless whether or not they're able to do that, because obviously I don't see a situation, maybe Will Clapp comes back, but we obviously know that he's not, he's not going to be your center one. He's going to be a reserve backup at most, which would still then have you prioritize getting a center in the draft. So center is just such a huge priority. Boundary corner, obviously, because there's nobody there. I understand what he's saying about right tackle, and I get it, because if we look at of the 4, Trey Pipkins is kind of the weakest link of the 5. But if it's me, Dan, there's also a gap at interior defensive line right now that you're wondering what in the hell is going to take place there. You gotta get some bodies into there, because whatever ends up happening there, the Chargers obviously are gonna need somebody to stop the run. And I don't even know if you could put together a lineup right now, even with the guys that you have in the interior, that you could say would be reliable to do that. So you got to get some starting bodies in there.
As you were talking, and I want to ask this question to folks in the comments, because I'm curious what you think, Jake, and also what people think in the comments. I'll put them out here. We can kind of talk about it. But like, think back to the last couple of years. Maybe we just focus on last year, because last year was like an absolute train wreck dumpster fire, right? And take injuries out of the equation for a sec. Like if we thought about like the 3 biggest reasons why this team sucked ass last year, like what were those 3 biggest issues this team had last year? Just 3. What would your answer be?
I mean, pass blocking, running the football. There's 2 right there on offense, and secondary coverage.
So they couldn't run the ball, they couldn't block, and they couldn't cover.
No. Sounds like 3 things that you need to win a football game.
So, and I'll let folks kind of put in the chat too, but let's just focus on those 3 things for a second. Currently, so far, they have targeted the run game. I would say they targeted that with both Disley and with Gus Edwards. Check. Whew, okay. Can't cover. Hasn't been touched. And honestly, it might be worse now, because technically Mike Williams isn't on the team. And they can't block. They did that. They helped there with Will Disley. So they went towards that. Folks in the comments, they're saying no discipline on defense. Agreed. You saw that a lot. I would say with Jake, you saw a lot in the secondary, like for sure. Bad defense overall. One-dimensional on offense. Jake, to your point, they couldn't run to save their life, which is, God, that was so bad. So bad.
Gotta love those 2nd and 12 running plays that negate in negative that get you negative yardage.
HH4 says no team speed or toughness. Couldn't play 60 minutes of football. But both of those 100%. And I think the problem with the no team speed is like team speed, I think sometimes it gets overhyped. And I do think this team needs more team speed, especially on offense. But toughness like this team has not had. And I keep going back to Brett Coleman because he had incredible insight yesterday. And he was talking about how like he goes bracket style of teams that if they were in a bar fight, like who'd come out on top. And he's like, in the past few regimes, like the Chargers, they're getting bounced in the first round or two. They just were not tough. And they talked a big game. You know, you want to be tough and rugged and you want to be physical and you want to be bound. They were not. This new coaching staff is going to be bringing in a tough team. So toughness is a big one.
Dan,
I think like, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to frame, like, I think when thinking through like what the Chargers need to do in the draft, what the Chargers need to do in free agency, and you know, like why haven't they done anything? Or I can't believe they go tackle at 5 or whatever. Like, remember the lens of what the biggest issues of this team were and what will translate to winning more football games.
Dan, I want to take the last 7 to 10 minutes of the show just because we have so many people in here. Let's just go rapid fire. I don't care what the topic is. Let's just go rapid fire. Let's answer as many as we can. Guys, light up the chat. Anything you want Dan and I to answer for the next 7 to 10 minutes, let's have it.
Okay. Mighty says, I truly thought we played mean all year, but tough? No. Jake, would you say they were tough?
No. No.
Let's see. Infinite Mind. Team is 2 drafts, another free agency away from being serious contenders. They'll compete this year, not just on coaching alone.
Here's where I think that we are giving so much praise to this coaching staff. And again, we haven't even seen any of these coaches put a product on the field yet. But the weight of a Jim Harbaugh with the reputation that he has for everywhere that he's been and what he's been able to do to those programs, you couple that with the handful of coaches that he pulled from Michigan, the other coaches that he filled out his roster with, familiarity definitely on the offense and defensive side of the ball, strength and conditioning coach in Ben Herbert. You just think that from a coaching standpoint alone, it may not be one of those type of situations, Dan, where, because I have said it for years, that if you have good coaching can overcome injuries to a team, where you can elevate a play as a coach of a second or a third string guy. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to fill that void completely, but you can fill it enough to where the drop down from the first string to the second and third string is not that bad, where you're not so reliant on it being top heavy with players. I do believe that what this coaching staff is going to get out of this roster, whenever it's all final and said and done, whatever it looks like, I think you're going to get the best versions of this roster. And that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, Jake said it. We're in rapid fire answer mode. So keep those questions coming. Got a bunch here, Jake. So let's go fast here. Francis says, sign back Mike Williams, over under 5%. What say you?
I'm putting it under 5% right now, unfortunately.
Charles asks, do we move back? When it's all said and done, do we move back? And who do we choose?
I give it a 75% chance that the Chargers move back. And take your pick of who the Chargers choose. Whether they're sitting at 9, whether they're sitting at 11, you really can't miss, because whoever it is that they're going to draft is going to fill a big time need for this roster.
I'm not letting you off the hook, Jake. Who do they choose? Trade back and the Chargers select?
Okay, I'll say who they won't choose with their first choice. You're not going to take a running back, and you're not going to take a linebacker. You probably won't take an interior defensive lineman. Everything else could be fair game.
I think it's corner or tackle. That'd be my guess. Corner or tackle, unless somehow like Rome Odunze is there at 11, which I don't think he will be, but corner tackle. Balliet G asked, do you think we can sign Calais Campbell to a 1-year cheap deal?
How old is Calais Campbell now?
And I don't know if they would do it if they kept Joey Bosa.
I don't know. I mean, not to say that the price tag would be huge, but
They could.
That to me would bring like back ideas of, or the days of Brandon Meebane, where it's just like, okay, that was a nice
Or like,
stopgap option, and maybe that's what you have to do. But
yeah.
you need to get younger at a number of these different positions.
Mighty asked, do we make the playoffs this year at least? Thoughts?
It's a big ask when you have to play in the same division as the Kansas City Chiefs. I think we can all agree, depending on what happens out of the draft, that defensively, at least right now, the Raiders are going to be improved. Depending on what happens with the quarterback situation of the Broncos, I mean, you can't really put anything past the Chargers because they're horrible with division records over the last couple of years. Like, they're either 2-4 or they're 1-5. So you just couldn't trust that over the last regime. And maybe that's partly where I'm kind of just still pulling myself back a little bit. But it's Jim Harbaugh. He's going to make these guys compete. I think he's going to find a way to get them to the playoffs, even if it's a wild card spot for his first year. I think he's going to find a way.
I think they get in. I think, yeah. I mean, they won 5 games last year. You know, they didn't have Johnston for the last month. They were crippled by injuries, but there's a lot of coaching and roster malpractice going on. There's a lot of roster depth issues. Like, what could go wrong went wrong last year. And I just don't see, I think this team's like, they're not as far off as people make it out to be. I'll put it that way. Barca to King. How do you feel about Everett leaving? It sucked, honestly. I love Joan Everett. He got such shade from the Chargers fan base a long time. And I kind of saw it coming because they were not going to pay 2 tight ends, Disley and him, that money. But he was the type of player that, like, he was a dog, man. Like, that guy was a machine.
Last year.
And I know people, like, the only thing they thought of was like, oh, but remember when he ran that route the wrong way against Kansas City and lost it? The guy was gassed trying to get out of the play. He couldn't do it. Like, whatever happens.
He was a bulldozer this last year. Like, dude, the first guy was not tackling him.
Nope.
He was bouncing off of 2 or 3 guys when he was getting the ball. The problem was he didn't get fed the ball enough, and he should have gotten it fed more, especially when Mike Williams went down.
Yep. Kapil asked, will they do training camp differently, more like the Chiefs, start earlier, old school? Given how Ben Herbert is, I know the NFL is different than college, but you hear a lot about how the practices in Michigan were like insane to where games were easier than practice. I don't know if they're going to go that far over, but I do think you're going to see a much different training camp and just a different era of practice with this new staff.
Yeah, let me bring something up here that just happened to come across Twitter. Familiar face to the Chargers. One Drew Tranquil is officially being the Chiefs recruiting officer for the team. Says, what's up? The real Mike Dub. See red and think Super Bowls. So there's one former Chargers player trying to get Mike Williams to come over to the Chargers rival.
Dude, that will be so painful if he ends up in Kansas City, of all the places, honestly. Like, that would suck. Let's see. We're rounding out here. Pacific Beat says, choose all Michigan players for the culture? ?
Still have the line for Michigan players to be drafted by the Chargers this year at 1.5. I think they're going over that. With this, there's 18 players represented from Michigan in this year's draft. I think it's very likely, especially with Jim Harbaugh. Take your pick on which position you're thinking about, outside of quarterback, obviously, but I think they come away with at least 2 of them.
I think you're right. Jake, we went over today. Shout out to all the Chargers fans and folks in the comments here. We had a ton of interactions here. Big day for Chargers. They finally got cap compliant. The Chargers no longer are employing Mike Williams. Khalil Mack agrees to restructure. TBD on Keenan Allen and Joey Bosa. I think first test, honestly, was passed by Joe Ortiz and company. Jake, anything else you want to tell or discuss on this one? I know we talked about a ton of stuff here. Did we miss anything?
Is it April 25th yet? Can we get there? Can we just fast forward? Let's get to April 25th, damn it.
We're 40-something days away, right? Like 43-ish.
It's going to be the longest 40-something days of the year.
Shout out to all the Chargers fans. Honestly, we've had some incredible feedback, constructive criticism, comments, love, all of it. And we take it all. I think one of the things that Jake and I pride ourselves is being transparent and honest and ourselves, for better or for worse. Honestly, sometimes worse. But thank you to everyone who's been through this and on this ride with us, and you've helped us out a ton. We're going to get a ton of love here in the comments, Jake. I'm going to blush and get red, so I'm not going to put them all on there. But shout out to everybody. You guys are the best. Big week ahead. We have some special guests coming, so stay tuned for that. If you have not already done so, please do us a favor. Hit that like and subscribe on YouTube. Helps us out a ton. We're marching towards, I think, like 7K now, which is insane. Just a wild ride. New coaching staff, new front office. Chargers team looks different. We're getting close to the draft. Free agency is still going. But that'll do it for this one. For Jake Hefner, you can find his beautiful face at Jake D. Hefner on X. Myself at Dan W Sports, my ugly mug. LAC_unleashed, where you find us on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Until next time, we'll talk to you on the next. Thank you to everybody on the next Chargers Unleashed.